In this case, there was a little glowing dome that was parked not far away, and this hairy ape man was walking with a flashlight of some sort. The man didn't find out by staying around exactly what was going on. This was in 1975 at Telem Bend. The newspapers in Northern California occasionally run stories on Bigfoot. It's an article from the San Francisco Chronicle, 1965. Richard T. Lee was an East Coast resident a few years ago that went around taking plaster casts of unusual footprints, and these are some examples, only one of which is a Bigfoot. And from this evidence, it's obvious that there's many strange creatures running around in this country yet. And many of the conservative scientists, of course, say that the Yeti tracks are bare, and what people see in the Himalayas and such are the red bear. But these are the tracks in front of you, and there's quite a difference, and most people that see the tracks are aware of the difference. And the abominable snowman, of course, is very similar to the Yeti. They've existed with us for thousands of years from all the accounts that we get. The New Scientist magazine of 1959 told of a number of old anatomical and zoological books from Asia that were illustrated with what we call the abominable snowman species. And a number of persons have described the species from first-person sightings. They usually say they have reddish hair and long arms, and they reach almost to the knees, and are much different from the red bears that also reside in the Himalayas. Pursuit had a detailed article on the abominable snowman in 1976 and gave many references and documentaries. And persons today wonder why we haven't seen more first-hand evidence, but in the past there have been numerous person-to-person contacts, captures, and even bodies of these giant wild men. All over the globe, the native tribes that live closer to nature have run across this species, and for the most part they seem to be timid and harmless. Well, some of these smaller species of big feet and giants and such are not so timid or hairy. As we just mentioned before, the Indians carried on quite a battle with their ancestors here before the advent of the white man. And many of these strange little humanoids turn up now and then. There are smaller, furry man-like creatures that have been seen in several areas of the world, and in 1937 discovery, a couple of African hunters tell of seeing such men and getting confirmation from local tribes. Monkeys they were not. Very similar to human beings, except very hairy. A humanoid monster named Spring-Heeled Jack kept London in terror for 60 years in the 1800s. He was described as a hideous-looking man with red eyes and claws like an animal, with the ability to spit blue flames and leap a dozen feet in the air. Dozens of persons swore to this strange description and remarked that after mauling or frightening them, he would just leap and vanish away. Well, since we're into the exotic here, we should turn to the area of vampires and werewolves. Since the Balkan area of Europe has always been full of vampires, it distressed the British clergy when returning crusaders began to give eyewitness accounts of vampires. And William of Newborough wrote in his history books of these dead rising from their tombs and being vitalized by some supernatural powers. The accounts of Count Dracula came from stories concerning a Romania ruler named Vlad Dracul, translated son of the devil. He was constantly repelling Saxon and Turk invaders. Vlad eventually became quite ruthless and unfeeling and brutal. And until the 70s, thousands of tourists poured into Romania to see the castle of the counts. Well, Countess Elizabeth Bathory was another cruel figure who had bloodthirsty habits, and when alarmed soldiers of Hungary stormed her castle, they found 13 girls chained in cells and dozens of bodies buried around the castle. She'd killed hundreds to drink and bathe in their blood. In the 1900s, there was a German named Hermann who sold cut-rate meat until it was discovered he was selling the flesh of boys that he'd killed and sucked the blood out of. University professors later examined his brain, but they found no deformity to cause such inhumanity. Well, in 1980, there was a particularly vile outbreak of vampirism. 26 young women in the Indonesian isle of Sumatra died in their blood being sucked right out of them, and 21 other women escaped death, and they told of a man with long, sharp fangs who attacked them. The police tracked the evidence down to a man named Peter Vlakuda. He claimed to be the distant descendant of Vlad Dracula. They found that the man had served 3 years in prison for earlier starting up a cult that drank animal blood and eventually got caught drinking the blood of a young girl. Well, Sumatran police told a news reporter that Vlakuta would be slaughtered on the spot like a savage beast if he was ever caught. And so far, they haven't caught him. Well, vampires seem to be related to persons who in life were particularly vile or died by suicide. A Vienna newspaper for June 10, 1909 goes into great length about a local castle burned by peasants who learned their vampire problems came from this source. And in the Americas, there have been dozens of persons who've admitted they can't help trying to suck other person's blood. Stephen Copland is a well-known vampire hunter who's tracked down a number of East Coast incidents. Now, many other incidents are reported by psychic researchers and psychologists who deal with distraught persons, and various groups. An interesting case from Mexico involved a European family that discovered their older maid was slowly draining their younger daughter's blood, and this was in 1958. Well, what causes vampirism? Now, there are different cases of vampirism show different motivations and causes, and there are certain poisons that induce a cataleptic state. And it's such poisons that are used by witch doctors in turning people into zombies. We'll discuss this a little bit later here. The human blood contains a high concentration of kinetic or soft particle electron energy, and persons whose negative lifestyle and thoughts keep their bodies depleted of this energy are often attracted to other persons with a greater charge. Just being around young persons is often enough to psychically leech off and steal some of this energy. And drinking the blood brings on even better results. Now, science is aware of a disease that's called hematodipsia that causes persons to have an overpowering urge to suck blood. And persons with this disease would best gain some iron through some other source than blood, because John Haidt, the London hotel keeper, had this disease and killed 9 persons in the 40s to satiate his desires and drives. It's interesting that sensitivity to light comes from a lack of iron in the blood, and garlic is known to break down red blood cells and remove the iron in them, giving some scientific credence to these legends and why vampires are allergic to light. Well, such drives may sometimes come from a genetic lineage, and some 15,000 years ago there were tribes on the planet that